Hi, I'm Enjanaut. Let's gain a point of insight. What is the story of Dark Souls? That's a bit of a loaded question, because everyone has a different answer. The stories of Souls games were designed from the ground up to be interpreted by the player, rather than told to the player. The ambiguity of a Souls game story lies not in just the absence of information presented by the game, but it also hinges on the thousands of unique narratives that are presented by players to one another. On this episode of A Point of Insight, we look at the constituent elements that make Souls stories so unique, in order to explore how the Souls games empower storytellers in the community, either intentionally or not. Cole Ross, on the podcast A Bonfireside Chat, described Dark Souls' story as a constellation of facts, and to this day I've never found a better way of describing it. Imagine each point of information you find in Dark Souls is a star in the night sky. Like the stars in a constellation, these facts come together and form pictures, symbols, ideas, concepts, things that are greater than the sum of their parts. By drawing connections from one bit of lore to another, a more complex picture emerges of Dark Souls. If you're like me, then you came to the realization that what you thought was flavor text and item descriptions was something more important. In a game where context is hard to come by, item descriptions and little bits of lore here and there from NPCs and other sources are the only real fabric that we have of the world of Dark Souls other than our own interpretation. The world map is the greatest piece of context that we as players have. It allows us to situate items in places where they belong, given that they were deliberately placed there, and understand meaning given the context of location. Let's take a look at this in practice though, with one of the characters that Dark Souls fans know and love, locked in the bottom of a tower at Darkroot Basin. Most Souls players, even those who don't finish the game, know Havel the Rock. He's memorable for his heavy armor and his giant dragon's tooth, and he's pretty early on in the game, but not a lot of players understand how deep and how wide his story spans. What we know about Havel comes from a few different places. The first and most noteworthy is Anor Londo, where we find Havel's armor, his shield, and his dragon's tooth. These items build our understanding of who Havel was through their descriptions. The item descriptions in Anor Londo, however, reveal something about Havel. That the armor that we find isn't necessarily Havel's, it belongs to Havel's knights, an entire order of soldiers who wore the same armor. There is still a debate as to whether or not the Havel that we fight in-game is the actual Havel, or just someone either impersonating him or one of his knights. Those who believe that he is the authentic Havel point to the key found in Darkroot Garden that's used to unlock Havel's tower. It's a compelling argument. The key description reads, "The basement of the watchtower forms a stone cell. There are rumors of a hero turned hollow, who was locked away by a dear friend, for his own good, of course." From his armor, we also learned that Havel despised magic users, so his armor has naturally high magic resist. Perhaps the most interesting addition to our understanding of Havel is Great Magic Barrier, a miracle found deep in Ash Lake. Great Magic Barrier tells us that Havel was the sworn enemy of Seath the Scaleless, the creator of all sorceries. So we're starting to build our understanding of Havel. He hated magic and was the sworn enemy of the creator of all sorceries. He went hollow and was locked away, presumably by Gwyn or some other friend that he had in Anor Londo. But we're omitting one large part of what we just looked at, and that is the location. Why of all places is Great Magic Barrier in Ash Lake? How did it get there? It's a mystery, and it's something that we keep speculating about, and this is exactly why the Souls series is so brilliant. Let's take a look at where we find all of Havel's items. From the primeval base of Lordran, Ash Lake, all the way up to the seat of the gods, Anor Londo, we find fragments of Havel's story. The burden is on us, the player, to determine whether or not the area we find the items in is significant. Probably the most important example of the significance is where the key to the watchtower can be found. The key to the watchtower is found on the petrified body of a weaponsmith after beating the Moonlight Butterfly in Darkroot Garden. This is significant because the Moonlight Butterfly is a creation of Seath the Scaleless, sworn enemy of Havel the Rock. Perhaps it was Seath's machinations that locked Havel the Rock up where he hollowed in madness. Earlier I mentioned the constellation of facts that we kind of view as Souls fans. Well, this is it. If you look at the map, you can see items strewn all across the entirety of Lordran. It's a constellation of facts. A little bit here, a little bit there. And the way we string them together and create stories is unique among games. It'll never cease to amaze me the amount of depth and complexity a few simple sentences scattered around a world can give a story. Dark Souls' ultra-reductive storytelling method is what makes this all possible, and if Dark Souls hadn't been on such a tight budget, just like Demon Souls, we might not have gotten the same type of story, and I think that we'd be at a huge loss for it. When I first started listening to the lore videos done by Epic Namebro, I was more than taken aback by how complicated the Souls lore was turning out to be for me. Soon, other contributors like VatiVidya, Dave Control Live, and other community figures came onto the scene and published their own interpretations of Dark Souls lore. Dark Souls and other Souls games don't try to hide a lackluster story under a cloak of mysteriousness. That's not the point of all this. Souls games don't hide mediocre stories underneath a cloak of obfuscation. Like an archaeologist examining evidence from the past, we're supposed to create our own narrative, our own theories, and back them up with evidence and share them with each other. I'd like to leave you with a final thought before I go. I'm reminded of an anonymous comment I read once on 4chan. It said simply, "The smartest thing From Software ever did was get their players to write their game story for them." This is the first video I've ever made, and I appreciate honest feedback more than anything. If you like my video, give me a thumbs up, and if you didn't, feel free to thumbs down. And please, leave me advice on what you'd like to see, what you'd expect, or what I can do better. In the video description, I've linked Vati's video on Gwyn for lore, as well as Dave Control Live's lore on Havel and Epic Namebro's lore on Havel. So, if you want to learn more about him, and you don't already know, take a look. Until next time, this is Enjinaut, signing off.